Hopefully you had some success putting the insert first method together. In this section, we're going to go over this solution together. So I think that we did a pretty good explanation in the last video, so we'll just jump directly into the solution here. So in my linked list class, I'm going to add another method to it called insert first. The insert first method is going to be called with some data that we want to store inside of our linked list. And remember, I know that specifically because of the directions laid out by the directions file. So the directions file for insert first specifically said the argument to this function was going to be some data. Again, remember, we're not calling insert first with a node. We are calling it with some data, and then it's up to you and me to create a new node. So back inside of our insert first, we will accept an argument of data, and then we will use it to create a new node. So I'll say const node equals new node. And we definitely want to pass in our data. Now remember that when we insert a new first node to our linked list, we do not want to overwrite any existing node that might be there. So to make sure that we do not accidentally overwrite any node, to make sure that we just kind of stuff this one as being first in the chain, we can take any existing node that might already exist at this.head and pass it as the second argument to the new node constructor. So I'll say this.head right here. Okay, so again, this part right here is probably rather confusing. In my opinion, I think it's confusing. So I want to do a quick review on why we are able to pass in this.head right here. So up in our constructor for the node, remember we had said that it takes a second argument. If we pass in the second argument, it will be assigned to the node that we are creating its next property. So let's go and look at that in diagram format one more time. I apologize if it seems like we are repeating here, but this is a pretty crucial little step. So we can imagine that maybe our linked list already has one node right here, and we don't want to lose this existing node. So we are going to create a new node by calling our node constructor. As the first argument, we'll pass in the data that was passed into our insert first function. And then as the second argument, the argument that gets assigned to this brand new node's next property, we will pass in the existing node. So we're going to pass in the existing node as the second argument to the constructor. When we do so, it'll set up a relationship like this right here. So the code that we just wrote, this right here, when we said const node equals new node and pass in this.head, it sets up exactly this relationship right here. Now the only problem is that this.head is still looking at the old node. And remember, one thing I also want to point out there is that if no other node exists right here when we call insert first, that's still okay. Like we can create our new node and the new node's next value will point at null, which is totally fine. So after we insert the new node, we have to repair the head reference. So the linked list class should no longer be looking at the old node. It should now be looking at the new one. So to make sure that works, back inside of our insert first function, we will update the this.head reference. So now this.head will be the new node, like so. Now this line right here can be simplified into one line. Note how we are creating the new node and assigning it to the variable node. So that's a totally unnecessary temporary variable right there. So I'm going to condense this down to one line of code. We're going to create the new node and then assign it directly to this.head. And then we can remove that variable reference. And that's all we need right there. So I'm going to save this. Let's check out our tests in the terminal and see how we're doing. So the tests are definitely passing. But again, this is kind of a crucial method, and I really want to make sure that it's really clear exactly what's going on here. So as one last step, and before we do this, let me say very quickly, if you get what's going on here and you want to move on to the next video, that's totally fine. Just skip the rest of this video. Otherwise, stick around, and I'm going to do a quick demo with our node class right here in the linked list class. Okay, so pause right now, skip if you're done and you understand what's going on. Otherwise, stick around. So I'm going to copy both of the classes that we just wrote, and I'm going to bring them on over to my little editor over here. So here's my node in my linked list. I'm now going to create one node. So we'll call this one node 1, and this will be new node with data 5. I'll then create a linked list implementation, or excuse me, linked list instance. So I'll say const link is, actually let's call it const list is new linked list. And then on the list, I'll call insert first. And I'll pass in, let's say, 5. If I now print out list, you'll see that it has head, data of 5, and next of null. So another way of setting up the list, let's say that before we inserted the first right here, I initialized the list with this new node 1 that we had already created. So maybe I called list.head equals node 1. So that just initialized the list with this node 1 assigned to the head. So this time when we call insert first, we now want to make sure that we do not accidentally overwrite any data. And you know what, I just realized I used a value of 5 in both locations here. So how about on insert first, we call it with 15. So now if we look at the result, you'll see that the head of our list, so we are printing out list right here. Here's list, here's the printout. So the head reference points at our node with data of 15. And then its next property points at the node with a value of 5. So clearly we had a node associated with the head, and when we inserted this new record, it took that old head, it took the old node 1 and kind of hijacked it or nested it within itself or created a reference to it. And then the value 15 replaced the old node as the value of head inside the list. This is one of those things where I can probably talk about it all day, but you got to play around with the code a little bit or look at some diagrams to really get it. It's a very visual thing, I think. But hopefully at this point, this insert method is starting to make a little bit of sense. So let's now continue in the next section and start working on our next method. I'll see you there.